Salamun alaikum. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. So a quick reminder about the concept of dhikr. We defined the term dhikr in the segment called Why No Mango and Pineapple in the Quran. The word dhikr in the Quran, spelled this way, dhikr, represents the Quranic stories and parables. We've defined this in the past. We're going to give a lot more evidence right here very, very soon. So it represents what the Quran refers to as al-qasas wal-amthal. So the additional evidence for the indication of dhikr is as follows. So we find in Surah Sad, which is Surah 38, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to Sad wal-Qur'ani dhikr. Wal-Quran dhikr. By the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is swearing by the Quran. And if you remember, we said the Quran is the actual text, the actual scripture that we read and we look at when we have the book of the Quran open between our hands. That's the Quran. Dhikr literally means the remembrance. So it is referring to the Quran as having dhikr. Having dhikr, that means it has stories and parables. And most of us have read in many different surahs, such as Surah Maryam. It always starts a scene or a new part of a story with the word dhikr. The very beginning of Surah Maryam, ayah number 2, right after Kaf Ha Ya Ain Sad, dhikru rahmati rabbika. So it is definitely talking about the story of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon his servant or his wayfarer, Zakaria. And another scene that starts in ayah 16, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts that scene with وَاذْكُرْ فِي الْكِتَابِ مَرْيَمْ وَاذْكُرْ فِي الْكِتَابِ إِبْرَاهِيمَ وَاذْكُرْ فِي الْكِتَابِ مُوسَى, and so on. So every time we see the word وَاذْكُرْ, it's the beginning of a part of a story that is part of dhikr. That's exactly what dhikr is. Dhikr is very clear. Again, we've given more information about dhikr in that video I mentioned, which is labeled Why No Mango or Pineapple in the Quran. But here we're providing additional evidence. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah 38, ayah 17, which is Surah Sad also, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is asking Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam by saying, "Isbir ala ma yaqulun." Be patient for what they say, and wadhkur, and remember or recall or recite the story. Wadhkur, recite the story of our wayfarer Abdana Dawood dhal aydi innahu awwab, etc. Wadhkur Ismaila wa al-Yasa'a wa dhal kifl in Surah Sad, and so on. In Surah Al-Ahqaf, Surah 46, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاذْكُرْ أَخَا عَادٍ إِذْ أَنذَرَ قَوْمَهُ. So all of these mentions of the verb وَاذْكُرْ exactly in this type of derivative morphological form, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us that this is related to dhikr. So we need to remember that at least 60% of the Quran is dhikr. In other words, at least 60% of the Quran are stories and parables, and we have to make sure that we give this part of the Quran its due importance, its due diligence. We have to spend enough time paying attention to the stories and the parables. So now we go to 9 specific examples of methodological foundations related to the concept of dhikr as specified in the Quran. Number 7, وَاذْكُرْ رَبَّكَ إِذَا نَسِيتَ وَقُلْ عَسَىٰ أَنْ يَهْدِيَنِي رَبِّي لِأَقْرَبَ مِنْ هَذَا رَشَدًا. Here I'm sharing with you a huge secret. Those of you who are serious about engaging the Quran, those of you who are really serious about understanding the divine lexicon, the sentences, the ayat of the Quran, whenever you get stuck, and this is one of my secrets I'm sharing with you, whenever you get stuck, use this dua, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught this dua to our beloved sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Whenever you forget or whenever you're stuck, say عسى أن يهديني ربي لأقرب من هذا رشدا. Memorize this dua. Make sure you use it every time you open the Quran. make sure you use it every time you engage any part of the Quran, especially the stories. And recall the dhikr of your Lord if you ever forget. So what does that mean? وَاذْكُرْ رَبَّكَ إِذَا نَسِيتَ. Of course it means أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. It means, making dua to Allah. But it's more specific. It is not just a vanilla flavor type of remembrance. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, recall the dhikr, meaning recall the semantics of these stories whenever you forget. So I'm forgetting what does furut or farrata or wama farratna fil kitabi min shay. I look up the word farata or furt as in Surah Yusuf, and I understand exactly what farata means. In the Arabic dictionaries, it means something totally different. In the Quranic lexicon, the divine lexicon, it means to separate, to split away, estrange. So this specific word, farata, is a part of the divine lexicon. It is not something you bring from the Arabic dictionary or the language of the 7th century Arab poets, as they did in the books of tafsir. You bring it from within the stories. So whenever you pick up such a story and you're stuck on any word, go back to the story that uses such a word. That's how you remember exactly what it means. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, مَا فَرَّطْنَا فِي الْكِتَابِ مِنْ شَيْءٍ, and you already understand the word فَرَّطْنَا means to estrange or to separate or to disjoint or to break apart. We have not broken apart any part of the book. That means everything is interlinked. Now it makes sense. But it doesn't mean it includes everything. It includes all the things within the Quran in an interconnected way. That's what that ayah is referring to. Number 8, وَكُلًّا نَقُصُّ عَلَيْكَ مِنْ أَنْبَاءِ الرُّسُلِ مَا نُثَبِّتُ بِهِ فُؤَادَكَ وَجَاءَكَ فِي هَذِهِ الْحَقُّ وَمَوْعِظَةٌ وَذِكْرَى لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. And everything in the form of stories that we recount upon you. It's addressing Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but again, by extension, all of us. Everything in the form of stories that we recount. Now, I included this ayah, by the way, because it includes naqussu, which is qasas, which is the stories. So it's clearly related to what we're discussing. Everything in the form of stories that we recount upon you, of the dictates related to the stories of messengers, min anba'ir rusul. What is dictates? What is anba'? Anba' is not just news or information or reports. Anba' is something looking forward, something that helps you understand what's coming, something that helps you understand how to behave. That's anba'. So it's information that you can use going forward. That's different than an account. An account is just for information purposes. Anba' you put to use going forward. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam something very critical. Nobody has told you about this before. You have never heard this before. Qasas, the stories are part of anba' for you. Alayka, upon you. This is required upon you. So we tell you these stories not just to tell you what happened in the past. It is not just for entertainment purposes. It is not just for making you feel better about the miserable treatment that you're receiving from the enemies of Islam. It's much more than that. These stories are helping you lay out your way forward in how you carry out your mission and how you deliver the message with which you have been tasked. This is a brand new piece of information. Nobody has told you about this before. Remember, we talked about the samawat being split from the scripture, from the text itself. One of the layers of samawat, one of the layers of understanding that are included in the Quran is what is called the layer of wahi, the layer of enjoinment, the layer of instructions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives to our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and by extension to all of us. This is not just to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is also to us. When we understand these stories, they become something that is really critical for our training. And remember the guidance that comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is the divine water that we talked about in the video called Why No Mangoes or Pineapple in the Quran. The divine water, which is the divine guidance, is commensurate with your own Weltanschauung. It's commensurate with your own level of understanding. And therefore, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes you understand a part of a story, It is helpful for your future. It is helpful for your planning. And we discussed in a prior episode the meaning of inna ma'al usri yusran. Whenever you run into difficulty, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you the understanding that this is an opportunity for you to run toward Allah, to run toward dhikr, and see what you can extract from dhikr. Forget about your troubles. Focus on what Allah can teach you on how to deal with your troubles. This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repeated it twice. Inna ma'al usri yusran, inna ma'al usri yusra. So therefore, the yusr, which is the ease of understanding that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will provide you specifically at the time of challenges through the stories, is exactly how we do this. And that's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provided His instructions and His guidance to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam during the worst type of tribulations that he went through. Everything in the form of stories that we recount upon you of the dictates related to the stories of messengers is also intended, and this is a beautiful part of this ayah, مَا نُثَبِّتُ بِهِ فُؤَادَكَ, is also intended so that we steady your cognition. What does that mean? Steady your cognition. That means we make you remember the exact meanings of these words. By the way, cognition or fu'ad has been often translated as heart. So what is qalb? It's also heart. So there's a lot of confusion in the translation and the interpretation. This word is the same as that word, the same as that word. They believe in synonymy. The Quran does not have synonymy. So fu'ad and qalb are different words. They mean different things. So for example, in Surah Al-Qasas, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is discussing the story of Musa, the mother of Musa, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Qasas, وَأَصْبَحَ فُؤَادُ أُمِّ مُوسَى فَارِغًا إِن كَادَتْ لَتُبْدِي بِهِ لَوْلَا أَن رَبَطْنَا عَلَى قَلْبِهَا. So in the first part of the ayah uses fu'ad, in the last part of the ayah uses qalb. Two different words meaning two different things. It could not be that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala meant for these two words to mean the same thing. And there's a new lesson for you, a new gift, so to speak. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using the word fu'ad in here. So what is fu'ad? Fu'ad is the awake part of your consciousness, of your cognition, of your perception. When you're awake, you are engaging your fu'ad. When you're not paying attention, what's your subconscious motivation is part of your qalb. That's the Weltanschauung that we talked about. So fu'ad is your awareness, your cognition, your intentional perception. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and by extension us, the stories help you align your fu'ad, your conscious cognition, to the divine lexicon through the stories. وَكُلًّا نَقُصُّ عَلَيْكَ مِنْ أَنْبَاءِ الرُّسُلِ, we recount upon you. You have to do what we teach you in these stories of the dictates related to the stories of messengers, so that we steady your cognition. In other words, if you follow the instructions we're giving you, and if you really learn and engage and strive to extract the Abrahamic locution, the divine lexicon, they stick in your perception. That's the reward Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you. How do we know this? Allah is saying, مَا نُثَبِّتُ بِهِ فُؤَادَكَ. We make it stick. We make it steady. We make it secure. It's rooted. It's grounded. It's firm. It's not going to be shaken. You trust Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you that confidence. And then the ayah continues, وَجَاءَكَ فِي هَذِهِ الْحَقُّ وَمَوْعِظَةٌ وَذِكْرَى لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. And in this one, now, هذه, this one in the feminine form, we're not sure if it's related to the whole surah of Hud or this specific ayah. My inclination at this point, because I'm still doing the research, to be honest with you, is that this whole surah is full of such guidance and such firming up of the lexicon. And there is, by the way, if you accept the hadith and if you believe the hadith, there's a very famous hadith from our beloved sallallahu alaihi wasallam where he says, شَيَّبَتْنِي هُودٌ وَأَخَوَاتُهَا. It drove me to have gray hair, the surah of Hud and the sisters, meaning the other stories of other prophets. And this is a clear indication of the importance of dhikr. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in this ayah, and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam translated that learning into that hadith. Perhaps, Allahu A'lam. But I tend to believe that hadith because it confirms everything in this specific ayah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala firmed up or secured his fu'ad, his consciousness, his cognition, his perception, wherewith he makes decisions and he understands things. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him in this one, in hadihi, this surah, al-haq, the truth, wa maw'idha, and an exhortation, and an example of the benefit to believers if those believers are allowed to spontaneously recall the divinely provided answer to their inquiries. Remember dhikra, we discussed this term in the series on Surah Abasa, part number 3. We discussed it in full details. It's really important that we take these terms and do the nested interpretation that we've been using all throughout the series and all throughout the videos on this channel. It is really important not to make things up from our own head, not to go to this person or that person, what do you think this word means? No, do the nested interpretation within the Quran. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَيُعَلِّمُكُمُ اللَّهُ. Have the discipline and Allah will teach you. Remember, we said taqwa is the discipline in applying the methodology. Taqwa. Muttaqun are those who show that discipline in applying the methodology. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us, you want to learn? Ittaqullah. So He says, Wattaqullah wa yu'allimukumullah. Have this discipline in your methodological engagement of the Quran. Allah will teach you. This is exactly what this ayah is saying. ما نثبت به فؤادك وجاءك في هذه الحق. You have been given the truth, you have been given the exhortation, and you have been given an opportunity to spontaneously recall the divinely provided answers to all your questions. And this is exactly what I said earlier when I mentioned إِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا. Anytime you have challenges or difficulties and you have questions that you don't know how to get them answered, run toward dhikr. Run toward Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah will open up the doors to help you understand. I'm not promising you it's going to be instantaneous. We talked about this before. It's not necessarily instantaneous, but it will come to you in a spontaneous fashion. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is promising that this is dhikra for mu'mineen. This is the definition of the word dhikra. Alhamdulillah alladhi hadana lihada wa ma kunna linahtadiya lawla an hadana Allah. لقد جاءت رسل ربنا بالحق. I thank you very much for watching. Salamun alaykum.